Welcome back. This is the last intro video before we start typing code. And what I want to do is quickly talk about the important changes from 3.x to Bootstrap 4.x. So there's a ton of changes, a lot of syntax changes to the class names. We're not going to go over each one. I'm going to show you a document that details all the changes, and you'll see there's a lot of them. It would be a very long video to go line by line. And the reason I'm not going to do that, aside from it taking forever, is that the way that we develop Bootstrap, that we work with Bootstrap, is that we usually have the documentation open anyway. So there's no need to memorize every single change up front before you start typing code. If you're working with the docs open in a window or in a different monitor, as you're typing your code, you usually reference the docs, copy and paste, look at things, tweak them, and that way it's different than some other tools that we'll use later on, where you don't need to have every little bit of knowledge in your head to actually begin. So I'm going to show you the big changes, but the way that I do it, I'm working with Bootstrap 3 and 4 right now in different projects at the same time in my life. I always switch between the docs because I confuse myself which came from which version. I'll use the wrong syntax unless I'm actually looking at the docs as I'm typing code. So if you go to the documentation, forget Bootstrap 4.x, you'll see that there's a migration tab on the left. And this document details all of the changes. And it starts with the most recent changes from beta 3 to the stable release. And then from beta 2 to beta 3, here's what changed. From beta 1, which is just called beta, to beta 2, and so on. But if you keep going down, you'll see that there's a summary. And this summary includes, at the very beginning, the most important overarching changes, and then it goes into individual pieces per component. So every class name, pretty much everything you see in pink, is either something that was removed or added or changed. The terminology or the class names changed. So let's talk about some of these big changes. First, there's something called Flexbox that is enabled by default. We haven't talked about Flexbox. If you're not familiar with it, it is it's a model, it's a system for positioning, moving around elements, for laying out your web page. And it makes things a lot easier, a lot less messy than pre-Flexbox days where people used things like floats. So Flexbox is enabled by default. That doesn't mean that you have to know all about Flexbox to use Bootstrap, but it is now built on it, and it wasn't in the past. But this also means that if you do know about Flexbox, which I'm going to spend some time on in this section, we can use some nice Flexbox wrappers, some nice classes that are included, these utility classes, to move things and position things even more precisely. So Flexbox is something that Bootstrap 4 is built on top of, and Bootstrap 3 wasn't. The next important point is that the main unit that was used in Bootstrap 3 was pixels, px. Now in Bootstrap 4.x, it's something called rems, REMs, root M's. We will come back to what this means, but it is basically a relative unit that allows you to scale the size of things on the web page based off of the global font size, which leads us to the next point. The global font size has changed from 14 pixels to 16. That doesn't mean everything is 16 pixels on your entire page. It just means that the global font size is 16, and when we use REMs or rems, we are giving different sizes to things based off of that global size. So if I say something is 2 times the global size or 5 times the global size, it's referring to this global size. We'll come back to it when we talk about typography in just a bit. A different video, that is. The next important change is that there's now a fifth tier for the grid system. So there are now 5 screen sizes ranging from extra small to medium to large to extra large. And that's all I'll say about it for now. We will come back to this because we have at least 1 or 2 videos in this section on the grid system. But just know that there's now a new tier, and some of the class names have changed as well. Furthermore, I don't usually say that. Anyway, furthermore, there are dozens of new utility classes that are really, really useful. These allow us to set common properties like padding and margin, and not just padding and margin, but also padding top and margin top, left, right, bottom, top and bottom, left and right. All these different combinations, we can do them really easily with a single class that we add to elements. We're going to spend at least 1 video on these utility classes, but these are new. They did not exist in Bootstrap 3, and they're one of my favorite things that have been added. So moving on to the grid system, in some more detail, move to Flexbox. Updated class names, so things have changed a little bit. It's not just behind the scenes that there's Flexbox. The actual syntax and terminology is different. And there is a new grid tier. Again, we'll come back to that. Under components, there's a big change. There's a new component called cards, and it replaces 3 existing components from Bootstrap 3. Panels, thumbnails, and wells are all gone. They've been replaced with the all-encompassing component cards. We will have a video on that, and we're going to build a small project that uses cards. Next, there is no longer an included icon font. There used to be something called glyph icons. I usually say glyphicons. It's no longer included. That was only in Bootstrap 3 and earlier. In Bootstrap 4, if you want to use an icon font, you include your own, which I like to do that anyway in the past. I liked Font Awesome. It had more variety. These are some suggestions. We're going to use Font Awesome anyway, so this isn't a huge change. Well, it is a big change, but not for us because we were already using Font Awesome. Next, there was something called a pager component. It's gone. And this last one refactored nearly all components to use more unnested class selectors instead of over-specific children selectors. This is just saying that behind the scenes, things have been cleaned up a bit in the source code, and that a lot of these components have been refactored and changed. And there's a breakdown by component at the very bottom. I won't waste your time going over every single thing, but let's just pick one. Let's take a look at buttons. So here's a breakdown of the important changes. There's no longer a button default. It's now button secondary. So this is an example of something that I would just look at the docs and find. You don't have to memorize this ahead of time, although this is a small change, so maybe it's easy to recall. But other things, like there's no longer a button extra small class. It's now just button small because the button small is smaller than it used to be in Bootstrap 3. So they didn't need an extra small. Anyway, there's other changes, but pretty much anytime you see one of these pink classes, something changed, whether it's been removed or added or changed, different syntax. So we will revisit some of these as we go, but I just want to sort of lay out my philosophy about learning Bootstrap 4. It's not worth trying to memorize all these changes. Just look at the docs because you're going to be doing that anyway. So I wouldn't panic too much about these changes. All right, so I'll leave it here. There are a lot of changes, but many of them are behind the scenes. We're going to start off in the next video by setting up things with Bootstrap 4. There's actually a new JavaScript library we need to include that we didn't need for Bootstrap 3. So that's a change that they actually don't mention up top. So that's something that we'll get into in the next video. We'll start typing some code, and then from there, we're going to talk about typography, some of the spacing utilities, the grid, Flexbox, and build some projects. Okay.